Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another short ride with the stud. And wow, this is a great one. Son of a gun, I love this one. Uh, it's about one of, in my opinion, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. A guy that certainly could have been a world champion. And this comes from one of the old stud stories. And I really love the fact that we're able to do that. We're past 50 stud stories on the Classic Continental Wrestling channel. And this one I think is number 37. And it goes back to February 20th, 1975. And it's all about the plane crash that Bobby Shane died in Tampa Bay on the plane with with the pilot, Buddy Colt. Austin Idol was on that plane, and so was Gary Hart. So if you've never heard this, and even if you have, this one never fails to get me to go back and want to listen to it again. This is a really great piece right here. This is came from Stud Story number 37. It's on the Classic Continental Wrestling.com right now. It's a 1982 plane crash that killed Bobby Shane. Everybody, welcome back to another Stud Story. We're going to have a different one this day. Something that we haven't touched on very much. We talked about maybe a couple of little stories about flying airplanes and private planes with my dad's uncle, Lester Welch, one of my family members, down in Florida. But private planes were becoming pretty popular with wrestlers in the 1970s. Crowds were really good. They were making a lot of money. They didn't want to drive all the miles that they had to in certain territories. So we're going to talk about a particular flight that happened on February 20th, 1975. And to start it out, my last stud story that I did was on Bruiser Brody. This one is on another great star, another guy who had the potential, I think, to be an NWA world champion. His name was Bobby Shane. Bobby Shane was he was an inventive, creative type of guy. He was one of the first guys to have a valet, a ladies valet. This was in the early 1970s. He had a tremendous run in one of my territories, southeastern Gulf Coast territory, in the late 60s. One of the great runs, probably as big as anybody that was there other than my father's run. When my father left there in 1958, Bobby Shane came in there. He took over as booker, got over tremendously in that Gulf Coast territory, and from there came to Florida. He was a bona fide star. He had everything that it took to be a great wrestler. He had great interviews. Like I said, he had one of the first ladies ever that managed him and went to the ring with him. It was a new gimmick, not hadn't been done. So he really got over in Florida. I think he came there probably around 1973, and wow, just really was skyrocketed to the top as a heel, and so. And everybody, like I said, was starting to fly in airplanes. We were doing a lot of that because everybody in those crews. So Florida was on fire in 73, 74. Dusty Rhodes turned babyface. It just exploded. Guys could afford to fly. And they were doing a lot of it in private planes. And I was doing it because I lived in West Palm and we're in different location than the rest of the crew, which was in Tampa. I was flying commercial a lot. And a lot of guys were obviously not only just flying, but wanted to have their own planes. And one of those guys was a guy named Buddy Colt, who was another tremendous wrestler, another great heel, same time frame, 73, 74 in that time frame. And on the night of February 20th, 1975, Buddy Colt, Gary Hart, and Bobby Shane all flew down to Miami, work Miami. It's a driving is a 4-hour trip, flying is about a 1-hour trip, a little bit more than 1 hour in a private plane. And so they flew down for the matches. They got ready to go home at night, and for some reason, and I have had a long conversation with Austin Idol. His real name is Mike McCord, and he was wrestling on this card in Miami that night. And he was still known as Mike McCord at this time. He had not become Austin Idol. But so anyway, Mike had an opportunity to fly back to Tampa with him, and he says, "Oh yeah," and they said, "Sure, get in the plane with us." And so when they loaded into the plane, obviously Buddy Colt's in the pilot's seat. Gary Hart's up front with him. Behind Colt, sitting behind Colt was Bobby Shane, and on the right side, behind Gary Hart, was Mike McCord, the future Austin Idol. And they took off from Miami, had a pretty decent flight. But being the case as it was in Florida a lot, because in the wintertime, temperatures got cooler at night, there were sometimes fog problems. Buddy Colt is not an experienced pilot. And I say this in his defense. You know, he had not flown a whole lot at this point, and when they got to Sarasota, it was beginning to get socked in by fog, and they were told that they was probably not going to be able to land in Tampa, but they went on anyway, and they wanted to give it a try. Which, that wasn't uncommon back in those days. I've been on a lot of flights with private planes, and they would sometimes take a look before they changed their mind about going to another airport. So as they flew into Tampa and over Tampa Bay, which is a huge body of water, for those of you, and I'm sure a lot of you have been down in that area, then now they have a big, fantastically beautiful bridge there that crosses Tampa Bay from St. Pete over to the other part of the inland called the Skyway Bridge. Back in those days, the Skyway Bridge was there, but it was an old bridge, and it was a two-lane bridges side by side. But anyway, they got there and they encountered the fog. Really bad fog. And this is the story. I got this story from the guys on the plane, Mike McCord. And so Dennis, he explained to me what it was like, and he said that he suggested let's go back. Let's go back to where we can land and not have this fog problem. And they were. So Buddy wanted to make a run, and they knew they were close to the inland airport. They couldn't land at the big airport. It had shut down. And that should have been a real indication that they needed to go somewhere else. When you couldn't land at the main airport, you were really going to be a problem. And at a tiny one. There was a little tiny airport at MacDill, which is the Air Force base. And it's a huge base. And so they were trying to land at MacDill. And anyway, they got too low altitude. They made it past at the airport, a try at it, and then we're going out and making a turn and going back. And I guess Buddy lost contact and didn't notice his altitude, and they end up crashing. And the way they crashed is they were making a turn to the left to go back around to make another pass to try to make a landing. And they got so low that the left wing clipped the water, and it flipped it. It went nose over, head over head, nose, tail, flipped 4 or 5 times, and then the impact of it just crushed things, and it crushed them so badly that it crushed the motor up in front that pushed back onto Buddy Colt's legs and crushed his feet so badly that he would never wrestle again. It was the end of his career. And then he pushed Buddy's seat back into the seat that Bobby Shane was sitting in. and Bobby Shane got his foot trapped in there. Could not get his foot out of between the Buddy Colt's first seat, the seat in front of him, crushed into the seat in which his foot was in. And so the impact, it kind of knocked everybody out for a second, and even knocked Dennis out, McCord. And he said he came to, and he just kind of crawled out of the plane, and he's out there in the bay. And they were a long way away from any structures. Dennis said that he could see a house or some lights where there was a neighborhood, but he said it looked like it was at least half a mile away, out in the middle of Tampa Bay, basically, where they were. And so Colt, they had to go and get Colt out. Gary Hart, who was up front, had been thrown through the front windshield and was out there in the water too. Dennis found him and kind of got him around. And they went around and helped Colt get out. He had gotten kind of thrown out of the plane as well. And the last person in the plane, Dennis says, was Bobby Shane. And they all went to Bobby to try to get him out, and his foot was trapped. Water in the Tampa Bay is not hugely deep, but probably in the area where they was, Dennis said water turned out to be about 20 feet deep. And so they couldn't, the three of them, and Buddy wasn't much help. He had a crushed foot, and he couldn't do anything much. Dennis had some cuts, so did Gary Hart, and the two of them tried their best to pull Bobby out. They couldn't do it, and then the plane began to sink. And needless to say, Dennis describing it to me, Bobby screaming and plane going down and nobody able to help him. Horrible deal. So the three of them gathered themselves and they started a long swim, slow swim, Dennis said, to the lights. And they end up being able to scream and get help from somebody that had a house there. It was along it's an island there, and I can't remember the name of the island right now. Davis Island, I believe it is. It's right there in the suburb of Tampa, right across the street from the big building, that they have their hockey games and all the stuff that goes on in Tampa now. Right downtown practically. And they came out and was able to get them up on their seawall and save all three of those guys. But needless to say, on February 20th, 1975, wrestling lost one of its great stars. Great guy as well. Very well liked, respected by everybody. Like I said, good enough. He could have been an NWA World Champion very easily, and had proven himself to be a star. And the sport lost to Bobby Shane on February 20th, 1975. And there are other stories like this one. I got another one I think I'm going to tell in the future that has to do with Ric Flair and Johnny Valentine and an airplane crash in the same year in the Carolinas that took the life of a pilot, and it ended the career of Johnny Valentine, and it about ended the career of Ric Flair. So, just a crazy thing that was happening back in those days. I think a lot of guys quit flying so much after this one happened with Buddy Colt and Bobby Shane, that incident. And so I appreciate, as always, you listening to everybody and your support out there. Really got a lot going on. I hope you've all gone over and taken a look at what we got going on, ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. Check us out there, and I really thank all of you for being a part of all this and allowing me to tell these stories, and I can't wait to tell you the next one. Wow, pretty chilling stuff, I tell you. I mean, every time I hear it, it was one of those things, man, that was happening quite a bit. It was one of the bad plane crashes, private plane crashes in 1975. The other one took place with Ric Flair and Johnny Valentine and some guys in North Carolina. this is just we lost a great one there, a guy that I think really could have been a world heavyweight champion. Undoubtedly had the skills and of all kinds. And I wanted to thank everybody for joining us for another one. I love presenting these short rides with the stud. This one is not really short, but it is really good in my opinion. It really explains a horrible event and maybe gives you a feel for what it was like to be a wrestler back in those days, and how much thought you had to put into getting on those private planes after something like this happened. Thank you all so much. Join us, as always, ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. That's where you can get these rides, all of them. And you join us, $4.99 a month, $39.99 for an entire year. And thank you so much. And we're going to bring you another one.